What's going on, guys? Welcome to Real Vision's weekly AI fire hose, where we drink from the pounding stream of everything happening this week in the expanding field of AI. I'm Ash Bennington, joined as always by our resident AI expert, AI developer, Mikhail Voloshin. Mikhail, welcome.
Great to be here as always, Ash. We've got a really exciting episode with us today. We've got Tesla being sued. We've got DoorDash using AI for taking voice orders. And I'm going to play with some stuffed animals.
Mikhail, fantastic. Let's jump right in. I know there's some big stories out this week in this field.
Yeah,
By the way,
first one...
that's not an AI cat, right?
It is not an AI cat as far as I know. I've never looked inside, but I don't think any of us would enjoy that.
That looks like a real tail.
Is, however, very eager to examine my new media rig and put her scent all over it, which will mess up my camera angles. So she's just going to stay right here for a second.
All right, Mikhail, let's jump in and start out with Tesla, because this is the story that caught my attention.
So, Tesla is slated to appear in court this month and the beginning of next month for a couple of driver fatalities that occurred in 2019. One of the incidents involved Tesla's self-driving autopilot driven car driving straight off of a highway, leading to a crash that killed the driver and seriously injured two passengers. I know, what a great note to start an episode on. But
listen,
Tesla
this mirrors what a lot of people feel about this space, which is excitement, enthusiasm, but also tremendous concern. And when you hear a story like that, it's very visceral. It hits home. You can see, obviously, some of the downsides, some of the risks of this technology.
Absolutely. And, you know, Tesla is denying liability, which is not surprising. Their claim is, quote, there are no self-driving cars on the road today. That's the official company line. And what they mean by that is that this is still prototype technology. The cars are not marketed as really being self-driving. Self-driving is just a term that we use to describe the cars, but Tesla insists that you always keep your hands on the wheel and that the driver still needs to intervene in case the machine is about to make a mistake. That's their
I mean, basically what Tesla is saying, their defense here, and it's just my interpretation of it, is that this is kind of just a beta test, right? That they're saying that this isn't really full self-driving car technology. You know, it's I'm sure very material for this case in terms of their legal defense, but kind of in another view, it also sidesteps the core question about where we're going to be in whatever the number of years is, whether it's 1, whether it's 3, whether it's 5, whether it's 10, where we do have these full self-driving cars. You're not going to be able to make that defense. And then this question about who is liable, how it works, what the rates of fatality are. I mean, I've gone into this story quite a bit myself because I think it's just so, terrible, obviously, on the one hand, in terms of the human tragedy, but also just such a harbinger of all the things to come. Like, here's an example of a question that I came up with thinking about this, Mikhail. If you have a fatality rate that declines by 90% for self-driving cars, right? But the 10% of errors are errors that a human being would not have made. For example, a car that drives itself off a cliff for no apparent reason. How do you assess liability in that? I mean, who is liable? Is it the coders? Is it the entity that owned the code? I mean, it just gets really weird, really murky, and really just interesting from the perspective of trying to assign liability and advance these technologies.
So you're absolutely right that the rate, if the rate actually has been going down, and my understanding, and this understanding is backed up by some studies, in particular some driverless car statistics. There's on a mile-by-mile basis, Tesla cars are actually, or self-driving cars in general, are actually much safer than humans, and that's a counterintuitive statistic. One of the contributing factors to that statistic is that self-driving mode is usually engaged on the highway, where you can score the highest number of miles with the least amount of stuff happening. Highway driving is relatively simple compared to urban driving. The other consideration is that, you know, people often forget two things. One is that when you think about whether or not every human is going to assess themselves to be a safer driver than an automated, than a machine, right? But
Right.
that's only when you're thinking about yourself driving. You're not thinking about the moments of when you're behind the wheel, when you're not driving, which is, when you space out to think about something at work, when you get that little blip on your phone, and even if you don't check the message, that grabs your attention for a second, that kind of stuff, right?
You're fiddling with the radio. I mean, it could be anything.
Yeah. The other thing that a lot of people don't consider is that the car literally has senses that you don't. You have sight and and hearing that may be superior to the car in many ways, but you don't have lidar. I mean, not yet. And if you do, please leave a comment below. You don't. The human body has it has the ability to detect acceleration, but we don't have the ability to detect absolute road speed, which the speedometer does. So we can feed that information back to the driver, but right now it's being integrated into the self-driving systems of these cars, and so the car is literally operating on a different set of inputs that you are. Now,
right. And that's the reason for the enhanced safety. What you're saying is this idea that you get a broader sort of spectrum of data than human beings are able to gather through their five senses. But here's the paradox, and the kind of thing that human beings are not very well suited to cope with, which is this idea: if you have a 90% improvement in safety, there is this joke in medicine that the odds of something happening are either 100% or 0%. It either happens to you or it doesn't happen to you. If someone says, well, listen, the fatality rate has been reduced by 95%, that's really cold comfort to you if it's your loved one, your mother, father, child, brother, sister who gets killed in the accident involving the self-driving car that malfunctions. And these are just really difficult problems for fallible human beings like ourselves to get our heads around.
The thing that really gets me about the ethics of self-driving cars is that it is a literal implementation of the trolley problem. It's
tell people what the trolley problem is for those who may not know.
So it's an ethics problem. I want to say composed by John Rawls in I want to say around the early 60s or so. But the idea is that there's a trolley that is it's a runaway train that's heading that's heading on a track, and there's a person that's tied to the railroad track. Now, there's a switch on the track that allows the trolley to go off to a different direction. However, on that second track, there is also another person tied to that track, because apparently the mustachioed mastermind villain has really been getting around. Now, the ethics problem is that you are standing at the switch of the track, and you can choose to either make the trolley go one way or the other way. There's a lot of variations about maybe what if there's 5 people on the track? What if there's only 2 people, but one is a baby and the other is really really old? What if one is some evil villain and the other is some average Joe? That kind of stuff, right? So right. The ethics problem comes into play when determining whether or not the act of intervention in and of itself it warrants some kind of moral culpability. So
there's another permutation of the problem. There's another permutation of the problem that's particularly sticky, which is you have a track that splits left and right. There's one person tied to each side. And then if you do nothing, if the train keeps going straight, it kills 100 people. So basically, it forces you away from this idea of benign neglect or not making a decision. So you have to choose. And these are exactly, as you pointed out, I think, this is real life trolley problems that people have to code today, not in some ethics class, not in a philosophical discussion, but they have to make these decisions about how, when you have a car that's lost control, the brakes are failing. Do you slam into another car? Do you slam into an area where there might be a pedestrian?
So the AI that drives Teslas is a hybrid neural network / heuristic evaluation system, which basically means that it uses neural networks for vision identification of objects. Basically, it uses a neural network to be that's a stop sign, that's a child, that's another car, that kind of stuff, right? But then having established these are these objects at these locations, it uses hard-coded heuristics with a scoring system to determine what action to take next. And this gets into game players and like basically it tries to maximize its good score, minimize its or minimize its cost, or however it's formulated. But the point is that it literally has a score for like this action. I am currently in this situation. If I take this action, it would lead to this outcome, which has this badness rating. If I take this other action, it'll lead to this other outcome, which has this other badness rating. Which means that it literally has to decide, like if the car's brakes have failed, and it can choose to either run over a pedestrian in the intersection versus slam into a nearby tree and kill the driver. There's actually hard-coded heuristics that Tesla's programmers had to sit down and evaluate in order to put numerical scores on the quality of one outcome over the other.
And the key there that you just said is that the developers have to make those decisions for the weighting. This isn't something that machines are deciding for themselves, and that's why it's an intractable ethical problem. I think something that you mentioned earlier was you said, do you really want to be the last guy on the road who's driving his own vehicle?
That's that's something that I think about a lot, which is where like as time goes on and more vehicles are self-driving, are you going to be at an advantage or a disadvantage if you're the last human standing? On the one hand, like you'd think you can weave and swerve around all of the other vehicles on the road because you're willing to break rules that they aren't. But on the other hand, like, does that increase your safety rating or not? Like, can you really say that you're a better driver if you're, if that's the way that you behave on the road?
We may reach a point where we're going to have to explain to our grandchildren what a DWI was and why it was something that was society looked down upon so much. You literally may reach a point where people can't understand that human beings used to operate these vehicles.
So I do want to interject with one other point from abstract philosophy, which was, I believe, it was a Socratic dialogue. I'm not sure if it was original to Socrates or if it came from Plato, but it presented a thought problem that goes like this. Imagine you're in some kind of personal danger for a little while, like there's some stalker that's chasing after you, and you borrow a weapon from a friend. The danger you have that weapon around for a while. The danger passes, and it's time to return this thing that you borrowed. In the time that you had been borrowing this weapon, your friend whom you borrowed it from has gone stark raving mad, and is now liable to hurt someone else with this weapon. So the question becomes, in more modern philosophical terms, is which Kantian categorical imperative wins out? The obligation to return things that you borrowed, or the obligation to not give weapons to crazy people? And I love this analogy or this thought experiment for self-driving cars, because it's not entirely clear to me whether the stark raving mad entity is the car itself, the human driver, or the programmer.
Well, it's always humbling whenever you have a conversation about ethics to realize that Plato and Socrates got there first, and maybe Kant did the elegant framing in a more modern sense. Listen, we've got a lot of stories that we want to talk about here. Another one that I'm really interested in getting to is DoorDash, the idea of DoorDash using automated AI to help process some of inbound ordering. Talk a little bit about this. It's an interesting one.
So this is a great one from the point of view of talking about AI taking our jobs and ultimately whether or not that's necessarily a bad thing. The system that DoorDash has just rolled out, and DoorDash, of course, is a food delivery system. For those who don't know, actually, Ash, have you ever used it? I've only used GitHub. I understand it's similar.
Grubhub.
Sorry, GitHub.
See, this is what happens when you have a programmer on the show, right? It is not a code repository; it is a food repository, Mikhail.
I mean, to misquote Erasmus, when I have a little bit of money, I use it on code, and then if any is left over, I spend it on food.
It's a perfect Freudian slip.
But anyway. DoorDash is a food delivery system where you order online from nearby restaurants, and they put a little brown paper bag together for you, and then a driver comes by, picks up the bag, and drives it to your house.
Dimitri, by the way, Mikhail, by the way, as a Manhattan bachelor, do you think I have not used this service extensively? I'm just useless in the kitchen, so without Grubhub, I'd starve to death.
There's a reason why I asked you. When I was living in Manhattan, I depended on food delivery services just a little bit. I'm just, I made use just a bit. So anyway, they found that about 20% of people can't stand ordering through the little menu system on the phone. About 20% of DoorDash customers prefer to just call the restaurant and put in their order. And this is particularly painful during the really highly slammed hours from between about 5 to 8 or so.
It's a classic example of what economists call a peak flow problem, and they're very difficult to staff for because you've got the pig through Python effect.
Exactly. It doesn't make sense for restaurant managers to hire extra people for necessarily in all cases. Sometimes it does, but often it does not. Unfortunately, what this means is that these restaurants are shorthanded for taking calls during these peak hours, and they found that upwards of 50% of phone calls are dropped, which represents, if you do the math, that's a 10% total revenue stream to these restaurants that's just not manifesting.
It's a big hit. It's just falling out of the sky for no reason because they can't
exactly
staff this.
So they're turning this over to AI. They've got an AI operator that answers the phone for the restaurant and says, thank you for calling Mikhail's McBurgers. How can I, whatever. And the customer describes what they want to buy in plain English, and the AI converts that into a set of orders for the cooks, and the rest of the order goes as if it would have had the person ordered by the phone app.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you can start to think about some very cool implementations on this stuff. Like, for example, Grubhub has all sorts of different weightings that you can sort by. I want to optimize for delivery time. I'm really hungry. I want to get the best top-rated hamburger in New York City. I don't care if it takes an hour to get here. So you can just imagine having this kind of almost colloquial conversation with an agent. Listen, I'm starving. I need a hamburger. I know it's 3 o'clock in the morning. Just get me the fastest possible burger. I don't care if it's gourmet or not. Bring it to my apartment as soon as you can get here.
From a developer standpoint, I'm going to be keeping my eye on interviews or customer satisfaction surveys that determine whether or not the people even know that they were talking to a bot.
You think the technology has reached that point, Mikhail, where people would not necessarily know that they were talking to a robot?
It's a loaded question because a person who is slammed and taking orders for the restaurant is not always functioning at their full cognitive capacity. So the question is
You made this point last week where you kind of made this distinction between, kind of almost the highest possible rate versus the actual rate that people have when they're doing a job. Meaning, if a human being, you told them dedicate all of your cognitive bandwidth to getting this absolutely right, might they perform higher? Sure. But in actual practice, the rate is lower. So the hurdle rate, so to speak, that the robot needs to meet declines. I thought that was just really interesting the way you framed that out last week.
Bingo.
Again, yeah.
Did I make the two hikers outrunning a bear analogy last week?
You did. I don't know if you did that last week or if that was in one of our practice shows that we didn't publish, but go ahead in case you...
Basically, two runners come up to two hikers come up to a bear in the woods, and the bear starts looking at them angry, and one of the hikers very quickly takes off his hiking shoes and starts putting on a pair of running sneakers, and the other hiker says, "What the heck are you doing? You're never going to outrun that bear." And the hiker says, I don't need to outrun the bear, I just need to outrun you. So the objective is not to get a perfect score. The objective the objective of the AI is to get a score that is better than how the humans are doing, and the humans don't always do as good as they think they do. So it's not it's not an impossible hurdle to reach.
By the way, one of the places you can see this phenomenon is in birth control methods. Highest actual rate versus effective rate differ dramatically.
I do want to mention about, more from a more abstract standpoint with regard to this, what this spells for the future, is that
Yeah.
the application of the AI for this particular in this particular manner doesn't actually deprive any restaurants of any jobs. They're not firing people who are just on the phone because they instead, they're augmenting the availability of these restaurants to take orders that are otherwise just being abandoned. So this isn't like this isn't putting anybody out. Instead, it's actually facilitating economic activity. So that's pretty exciting.
Mikhail, I could put on my cynical devil's advocate hat and add a single word to the end of that, which is today. Today, it's not displacing actual workers because it is, it's found this problem where you can basically optimize by bringing in new technology, so you're not actually laying anyone off. But that is today. It's pretty clear that you can see the direction, and I'm sure this is a topic that we're going to cover on many future shows, which is just the potential economic shock of what's going to happen when we start to see this move through the labor force. I know some folks made some comments in the YouTube last week about precisely that point, and hopefully we'll bring in some professional trained economists and have this conversation with them and get their thoughts and get an understanding from a different point of view from ours about how that's going to shake out.
I think it'll be very interesting to talk to economists about this because at the end of the day, here's the deal. I think that anybody, all of us want to progress towards that glorious Star Trek future of a post-scarcity society, right? But a post-scarcity society means not only that material goods are universally available through replicators, but it also means that labor is no longer scarce either,
Right.
which means that that these machines are capable of displacing the producers of labor just as surely as they're capable of displacing the producers of goods. And what that means is that we all have infinite amounts of labor at our disposal, as well as replicated meals coming out of the little shiny box thing.
And maybe at some point in the distant or not too distant future, we end up in the Matrix. Hey, Mikhail, let me ask you this. In our very much non-world where we don't yet have this lack of scarcity, let's talk about something that's really interesting, which is ChatGPT, OpenAI producing an enterprise version of their application to help monetize it. I think it should probably surprise nobody that this was coming. Talk a little bit about what they're doing, what the use case is, and what the model is there.
I tried understanding how ChatGPT Enterprise really differs from ChatGPT Plus, and I'll be honest, it doesn't seem like
ChatGPT Plus is, because I think this is something that both you and I pay for.
I use ChatGPT Plus pretty ubiquitously. It allows for you to get access to the latest trained models of that OpenAI produces. It allows for it lets you run those models on slightly faster servers, which means that your throughput is you can get more words out of GPT faster. It also allows you to use their plugin system that I demonstrated previously in one of our interviews, where you can have GPT sort of outsource its processing to plugins such as Wolfram Alpha to get it to do better math, or
Right.
you can have it a little code runner to get it to actually write little bits of code for itself and then run those code snippets.
By the way, I should say, in our demo of ChatGPT, you showed precisely some of the challenges that exist with the sort of math coprocessor units in the logical structure that is the large language model.
GPT is a language model, and that means that it can't do math. The analogy that I gave in, I think, our third interview was that you can no more expect GPT to be accurate at math than you can expect Excel to work as a spell checker. So with plugin architectures, you can get GPT to do a little bit better at that kind of thing. Now, OpenAI just unveiled ChatGPT Enterprise, which basically lets an organization buy an entire block of access to GPT Plus, essentially, to its entire staff. It also lets the organization create certain chat templates that might facilitate more conversations along the lines of what exactly it is that the organization deals with. So, for example, if the organization is a marketing agency and writes a lot of marketing copy, then they can precede their organization's edition of ChatGPT with questions that might help people write better ads. They also give additional data privacy guarantees because a lot of people who would otherwise use ChatGPT for business are apprehensive to do so because they know
Right.
that they don't want it to be used as training data.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But we don't yet have true customization by enterprise or by organization with this new enterprise software. Is that correct?
Not really. You can use fine-tunings, which allow you to recalibrate the weights of the neural network for your own, for your own specific needs. But the setup for fine-tuning requires a bit of technical acumen, and it's also really not cheap. Now, here's the thing that I want to emphasize about this release of GPT Enterprise Edition. It's to me anyway, this might be a controversial stance, but it's pretty obvious to me that the only reason OpenAI is doing this is because they're trying desperately to find some way to get GPT into the black. A lot of viewers might not know this, or at least, I believe we discussed this last week, but GPT or OpenAI is losing a lot of money. Their revenue in 2022 was only $30 million, which sounds like a lot, but their costs ran into $500 million.
Yeah. On paper, just the cash flow statement, not a great business. Obviously, the perception out there is that this technology is truly groundbreaking and therefore will advance in ways. And by the way, this is a very well-trodden Silicon Valley paradigm, which is you lose money, you get adoption, you get a huge user base, and then you figure out how to monetize it later. As long as the functionality is there, as long as the adoption rate is there, so goes the thesis. This is something that can be monetized later. But it really is something that's incredibly interesting. And at some point, you have to think that these are going to have to become cash flow positive businesses. They're going to have to generate free cash flow. Otherwise, maybe, the economic model needs to be rethought a little bit.
There's a specific archetype to this entire development that I'm reminded of. The inventor of movable type, Johann Gutenberg, created this civilization-changing invention, right? He died penniless and forgotten in some tiny little village in southern Germany without ever being able to profitably capitalize on his invention. He printed a bunch of Bibles. The Gutenberg Bible, of course, is very famous. I think he printed a total of like 300 of them or something. But he just couldn't move product, and he had to return the loans that he had made for building his machine and renting out his workshop and running his workshop. And his creditors ended up acquiring his publishing house, and he never he was never financially successful with it.
Yeah, it's an incredible story. By the way, I'm sure Silicon Valley VCs on Sand Hill Road now are saying, you needed us. We would have made it all better for you.
I'm sure. So this does sort of once again drive home the reminder that others will rise to the occasion if OpenAI doesn't eventually manage to sustain itself. Somebody's going to acquire GPT, probably Microsoft, and there will be other contenders by Facebook, by Google, by Amazon, that will, by Microsoft, by Apple, that will provide LLMs. So, this is just emphasis of the fact that this field is just on the cusp of absolutely exploding.
Okay, Mikhail, and to borrow from Monty Python, and now for something completely different. Mikhail, what the hell are Wugs?
Well, I wasn't gonna, I was just gonna show you one at a time. This.
By the way,
This is a
if you're
Wug.
listening to this podcast, we had about 10,000 people listen to the podcast last week. So Mikhail is holding up a little blue bird. It looks like. Is it a bird?
It's a
I mean, it's a Wug, I guess,
it's a stuffed plushie that my better half Amanda spent a day making. And yeah, it looks like a little blue Easter peep. So this is a Wug.
Yes, it does. That's exactly what it looks like.
Here comes another one. Now there are two of them.
Yes.
There are two
Wugs. They're Wugs.
exactly. Now this, and I'm holding up a much smaller little baby version of it. This is a young baby Wug. What would we call this?
Like a, I don't know, like a Wugette, a Wugino.
Sure. And there is no right answer, and that's the point.
If we were speakers of Spanish, it would be Wuguito.
The answer that's listed in the book I'm about to cite is Wuglet or Wugling. I believe Wugling. Okay, here's one, Ash.
They're just adorable, by the way, if you're listening to this on a podcast.
Here's one, Ash. What do you call a facility that hatches and raises Wuglings?
A Wuggery?
Oh my God, you got it on the first try. That's amazing.
Is that right? Is that the right answer?
Yes, that is the list. So these are a bunch of non. Sorry, I forgot. This little Wugling is about to fleeb. Would you like to see it fleeb?
I think so.
It will now fleeb for you. For those that are listening, I'm just rotating it in my hand, like
turning it
around and around. So, what would you say that this Wugling is doing right now?
I would say it's about to get us a psychiatric check.
Yeah, well, it is fleebing, and yesterday it fleebed. So look, these are a bunch of nonsense.
We're going to explain this complete insanity shortly. We have not totally lost our minds.
These are a set of nonsense words that date back to a linguist and psychologist named Jean Berko-Gleason back in 1958.
Okay.
And they were given to the little exercises that I just gave you were given to a bunch of preschoolers and kindergarteners to see whether or not they would all come up with common answers, and whether or not the common answers that they came up with were the same as the answers that adults would come up with. So this was a really interesting exercise in language acquisition, because prior to these experiments, it wasn't entirely clear that that a child didn't learn language simply by rote memorization. But these are words that they could not have possibly memorized because they were words that Gleason had just made up. And there's no such thing as a right answer because, again, this is just stuff that Gleason made up, but she did establish that the answers that adults came up with would be the same answers that children would come up with as well around age 4 or 5 or so. Now, I want to answer two obviously raging questions. One, why am I talking about this now? And B, why am I talking about this at all? The reason I'm talking about this...
Excellent questions.
Yeah.
Excellent questions, Mikhail.
The reason I'm talking about this now is because there's been a lawsuit in the last couple of years over the use of Wugs in like as a commercial property.
Okay.
Gleason has recently written a children's book in which she's trying to monetize on on her invention of these little guys, and unfortunately, in the 60 years since her original experiments, she's like the Wug has become a mascot of linguists, and so there's a lot of other products that are already monetizing this little image. I feel we're probably safe to use it because we're discussing it for academic purposes and educational, and we're saying this comes from Jean Berko-Gleason. Please go buy her book. But the point is that they've been these little obscure nerd mascots have been in the news lately. The reason why it's relevant...
all of this relate to AI?
because it sheds some significant light on how large language models work and how they mimic the operation of the human brain. The original experiments were instrumental in developing an understanding of language acquisition in young humans, and what it drives home is that the total amount of information that you need to have in order to have mastery of a language, or at least operational capabilities of a language, is much smaller than the total number of words in that language. You just need some vocabulary and then transformation rules. Now, here's the thing. The number of transformation rules to speak English is absolutely enormous, and linguists have tried to catalog these rules over generations and have ultimately failed. A neural network is very, very good at learning from example, and it is exactly the kind of AI that you throw at a problem when you want to say, there is some pattern in this data, but I can't be arsed to articulate exactly what that pattern is. Can you please figure it out?
Mikhail, let me ask you a question about this, because I find this absolutely fascinating. You know, while most young people in college may occasionally have a flirtation with Noam Chomsky's socialism, I knew I was a dyed-in-the-wool capitalist even as a young man. So I had a flirtation with his transformational generative grammars. The idea is that the human mind itself possesses these innate structures that allow us to create things like syntax, morphology, and the other transformations that we see in languages. How does that apply to computers which don't inherently possess those physiological wetware layers of creating language transformation? How does the machine do it?
So I'm really glad you bring that up, because Chomsky's innate grammar theory was very interesting, and was actually has actually proven instrumental in the development of artificial languages, specifically computer languages. Computer languages use something called context-free grammars in order to be parsed into machine code and compiled into something that the processor actually, into the ones and zeros that actually write on the processor. And so Chomsky's theories of linguistics actually were really important in the development of, compilers. But they have proven to have absolutely no basis in how humans process language, and they have no explanatory power in either language acquisition or in the describing of human capabilities. And the example that I always use with Chomsky grammars is that I am perfectly capable of producing non-grammatical speech. Company, OpenAI, customers calls during workload unveils.
Yep. Or you could just
pick some random words.
You could just pick up a contemporary sociology paper and get the same effect.
Very good point. If Chomsky's linguistic theories were true, and there was innate circuitry in my brain that required me to emit language on some set of grammatical rules, I would have been unable to utter that sentence. So the truth
why
is
that true? We have a sort of a biological imperative that drives a certain type of gait in humans, but I can hop on one foot if I want to be really inefficient.
I like that. But your knee still bends the way that your knee bends. You know what I mean?
Well, hopefully, Mikhail, every knee shall not bend at the will of AI in the near future. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground here. Obviously, a fascinating conversation. I always enjoy having these with you, Mikhail, because we could go deep into some of these stories that I think myself and most people would only be able to skim at the surface layer. You really provide this layer of context and depth that we just wouldn't otherwise get. Final thoughts, key takeaways that you'd like to leave from this conversation, because we've covered a lot of topics here today.
Go check out the work of Jean Berko-Gleason, and in particular, check out this children's book, especially if you have kids or if you have friends that have kids. It could make a really great present. It serves two purposes. Three, honestly. One is that it's fun for the kids. Two is that it ends up, while being fun, it ends up being a really useful tool for parents to track the linguistic development of their own children. And three, Gleason has already planned for the ability to voluntarily from parents collect bulk data so that we can get massive amounts of information about how humans acquire language and the rate at which at which children establish these milestones. I will add one more point to that, which is that we stand to gain a lot more understanding of how humans work by examining how language models acquire language than the other way around. In other words, if these LLMs are in any way models of human cognition, then we stand to learn about ourselves and about how we acquire language by watching what these models do.
Not only will I imagine that we're going to learn about ourselves and how humans acquire language, I expect that that's going to be fed right back into the process of developing more sophisticated, more accurate, faster, better neural networks. Mikhail, just another fantastic conversation, man. I'm so excited about these.
I'm always thrilled to be here. We're absolutely on a technology roller coaster, and parts of it are scary, parts of it are exciting, but it's coming at us, and it's worth watching where this goes.
Hey, listen, final thought to everybody out there. We very much believe in testing in production. We just jump out there, put these new shows out. This is a work in progress. We've got a lot of different ideas about how we can make this show better. Let us know what you think in the comments. You can always tweet to me at Ash Bennington and to Mikhail as well. What's your Twitter handle now, Mikhail?
I'm now at Mikhail Vol AI.
Guys, thanks so much for joining us. Looking forward to having this conversation again next week. Have a great week, everybody.